יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני, אלוהי ואלוהי אבותי, שלא יארע דבר תקלה על ידי, ולא אכשל בדבר הלכה, וישמחו בי חברי, ולא אמר על טמא טהור, ולא על טהור טמא, ולא על מותר אסור, ולא על אסור מותר, ולא יכשלו חברי בדבר הלכה, ואשמח בהם. כי אדוני ייתן חכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה, גל עיני להביט הנפלאות מתורתך. בלי נדר, third day of learning Talmud Bavli in a row. בלי נדר, regarding learning this again tomorrow, and so on and so forth. ממתי קוראים את שמע בערבים? We start with the question, from when do we read Shema in the evening? Why in the evening? B'shochbecha uv'kumecha. The Torah says when you lie down before it says when you stand up. So first we want to verify when you lie down. משעה שהכהנים נכנסים לאכול בתרומתן. Because we want to compare it to the zrizut, to the alacrity of the priests. עד סוף השמורה הראשונה, till the end of the first watch, דברי רבי אליעזר. Seemingly, Rabbi Eliezer posits that the time of lying down isn't all the time when you are laid down, but only when you are actively in the process of lying down. So when the general populace is in the process of going to bed. That's what it seems to be, which is the end of the first watch. By the end of the first watch, most of Am Yisrael is asleep. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim omrim. Why is that ordered differently? And why does it have an and? And the sages say, ad chatzot, till midnight. Rabban Gamliel omer, well, before we get to Rabban Gamliel's opinion, according to Rabban Gamliel, the sages said till midnight, not because they believe biblically it's till midnight. Rather, biblically it's all the way till dawn, but to distance man from transgression, they rule till midnight. So is it rabbinically till midnight and then biblically till dawn, according to Rabban Gamliel? Seemingly so. Rabban Gamliel says, Ad she'ale amud hashachar. For some reason, Rabban Gamliel, even though he explains the sages' rationale for distancing man from transgression, Rabban Gamliel himself doesn't rule like them, and he says all the way till dawn. Why? What's different? I don't know. Maaseh uva uvanav, and then there's an incident where the sons of Rabban Gamliel come mi beit hamishte, from the banquet. Amru lo, lo karinu et shema. They say to him, we didn't read Shema. And Amar lahem, they say to him, he says to them, Im lo ala amud hashachar, if dawn hasn't arrived yet, chayavin atem likrot, you must read the Shema. Im lo ala amud hashachar, seemingly it seems that it's after midnight, and the children are telling him, we haven't read Shema. So either they are aware of Rabban Gamliel's opinion, but they believe that the halacha is according to the sages, and that the halacha is biblical, and therefore even bedi avad, meaning even in a not ideal situation, they cannot say it after midnight. But Rabban Gamliel tells them, no, you can say it after midnight. And not only can you, you have to, because biblically you're supposed to say it till dawn. Or they aren't even aware of, or they can go according to Rabban Gamliel, their father, but they just aren't aware of that opinion, and he hasn't revealed it because maybe he agrees that for the masses, including his own children, the ruling of the sages is what should be the exoteric ruling, and the esoteric ruling, the more secretive ruling, is till dawn, and not everyone should know that because then they'll be a little lax with the keeping of the mitzvot. Less likely, I think. I'm not really clear on how halacha is poskened or was poskened back then. I would assume that the halacha went according to the sages, even for the children of Rabban Gamliel, though I remember in another case, in the community of Rabbi Meir, for example, his ruling ruled in his community. So on the other hand, Rabban Gamliel, I remember, was the head of the Sanhedrin, if I'm not mistaken. So you would think that his community is all of Am Yisrael, in which case the sages probably can overrule him. but I wonder how it applies to his own children. Veloso bilvad amru, and the Rabban Gamliel adds, not only when the sages said till midnight was it regarding Kriyat Shema, אלא כל מה שאמרו חכמים עד חצות מצוותן עד שיעלה עמוד השחר. Anything that the sages ruled is till midnight. Really, the actual mitzvah, the actual biblical injunction is to do it until dawn. For example, then he gives two examples. Hekter chalavim ve'evarim, the burning of the fatties and the evarim, which I still think are organs. Mitzvatan ad she'aleh amud hashachar. The mitzvah is until dawn. This is part of the temple service. You do not eat the fats of an animal, the chelev of an animal. You burn it. And other organs, I assume, which evarim is referring to. Ad she'amud ya'aleh amud hashachar. Biblically, it's until dawn, according to Rabban Gamliel. But this, according to Rabban Gamliel, the sages say, in order to distance man from transgression, we shall make it until midnight, just like Kriyat Shema. And v'kol hanechalim leyom echad mitzvatani ad she'aleh amud hashachar. Anything that is eaten for one day, the mitzvah is that you eat it until dawn. But the sages wanted to distance man from transgression, so we will say, the sages, according to Rabban Gamliel, the sages will say, till midnight. And it seems that all of these have to do with the temple service. Maybe that's the rationale, which we'll get to in a moment. Imken, if so, Rabban Gamliel continues. Or maybe it's not Rabban Gamliel here. Maybe this is actually the Mishnah saying, in response to the incident of Rabban Gamliel, they're saying, if that's the case, Rabban Gamliel, granted what you say, why lama amru chachamim ad chatzot? Why did the sages say till midnight? If the mitzvah biblically is until dawn, why did the sages rule till midnight? And the answer, kedei le'archik adam min ha'avera, in order to distance man from transgression. Now, since when does the Mishnah explain rabbinic rulings as offense? Isn't offense something that they kind of took for granted, that they knew was already a thing? Asusiag la Torah, as it says in Pirkei Avot, make offense for the Torah. Is this, by the way, referring to offense? Is another question I asked. And why doesn't it say that it's offense? Why does it have to explicitly say in order to distance man from transgression? So it's possible that it's just a way of phrasing, and this is perhaps where they introduce the concept of offense in principle, in general, in the Mishnah, in the oral Torah. Here in Berachot, this is where we really are introduced to the concept of offense. And they don't say for offense, but rather they explicate what it is, which is to distance man from sin. Or we already know what offense is, and really there's something particular about this that is different from offense. Or we don't know what offense is. But if we know what offense is, maybe the reason they're not saying just to make offense, and rather they're saying to distance man from transgression, is because perhaps there's something more general here. That if you are lax in these three mitzvot, which all have to do with either the temple service or with the fundamentals of faith, Kriyat Shema, then there's something in general lax with your service of God in general. And so it's not just to distance you from the transgression of not fulfilling these specific mitzvot, but rather you should be diligent in fulfilling these specific mitzvot. There's no reason for you to wait until after midnight. These are the first priority. Kriyat Shema, it's 3 minutes in your life to just say the fundamental proclamation of faith of the Jewish people. And the two other mitzvot are to do with the temple service, which is very, very, which is a place of alacrity and closeness to God. So you shouldn't wait till after midnight. Like even if you're able to, technically, you shouldn't. So anyone who does, there's something wrong with their priorities. So really, maybe that what it's saying is, in order to distance man from transgression as such, if you are lax in what you're doing here, then you're probably lax in general, and you're probably transgressing somewhere, and you're probably at much higher risk of transgressing because you're actually there's something a little that needs to be dealt with. There's something that needs attending to, something that requires your attention regarding your connection to the to God. So That might be why it's phrased "כדי להרחיק אדם מן העבירה." It might not be because it's explaining what offense is. Maybe we do know what offense is, but maybe there's something particular about this case where it's more than just offense. It's a fundamental principle of our service that these are mitzvot that we shouldn't do after midnight unless there's extenuating circumstances. Or it's just phrasing. Maybe it's just the way it chose to phrase it, and there's no really deep reason for it. Now we're at the Gemara. Tana, hey Chakai. Where does the Mishnaic author stand? Meaning, upon what ground is he dekatane me'ematai? Upon what ground is he starting the Mishnah with the word me'ematai? Or, perhaps more precisely, why is this even a question for him? Why is he asking from when is Shema? Since when is Shema time bound? Since when is Shema from a certain time, point in time? Vatu, and more, even more than that, further than that, what is the significance that, like, what's so special about the evening that it comes first? Why are we talking about the Shema of the evening before the Shema of the morning? And there's a reason, for some reason, this question is being juxtaposed to the previous question. In other words, the Gemara seems to imply to us that these have to do with the same answer, or there's something intrinsically linked with these two questions. So the first question is, where is the Tana deriving the thought that the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema is a mitzvah that you ask regarding the mitzvah from when you do it? Where are you getting this from? Like, yeah, you and I, we've said Kriyat Shema every night and every morning for I don't know how long. But since when is Kriyat Shema something that you do at a certain point in time? You would think that Kriyat Shema it's your declaration of faith. Say it whenever. Why is there a question of me'ematai, from when you should say Kriyat Shema? Shouldn't you say Kriyat Shema every day, like at every time, at every day? What about in the afternoon? Why not just say it when you have a few 3 minutes, like a free 3 minutes in your day? Where is the Mishnaic author getting this from? What is the basis for the presupposition that Kriyat Shema should be said at certain times? And in particular, why are we starting with the evening in this case? That's the question of the Gemara here. And for some reason, both of these questions are juxtaposed to each other. They're seen as linked. Now we'll see that both of these questions have one answer for both. So it could be that the Gemara was simply ordered knowing that it has one answer and therefore it juxtaposed both questions. Or maybe there's something intrinsic about these questions. Why did the Gemara know to ask the second question before it bothered answering the first question? So it seems to be simply questioning the whole beginning of this Mishnah. Why are we beginning with this question in the first place? Meaning, why is there such a question of from when? And why are we asking from when regarding the evening first? I would say there's an even deeper question, which I mentioned yesterday, which is why start the Mishnah here? The whole entire corpus of the Mishnah starts with this word, me'ematai, regarding Kriyat Shema. What is so unique and special both about Kriyat Shema and this particular concern regarding Kriyat Shema that this is what merits beginning the entire corpus of the Mishnah with? That's not even being asked by the Gemara. So there's a few answers to that, which is, well, maybe the Gemara and the Talmud in general take for granted that, of course, Kriyat Shema is the beginning and the fundamental starting point of the entire Mishnaic corpus, because the Kriyat Shema and timeliness of Kriyat Shema are the fundamentals of our faith. Adherence to time, the time and the appointed time and place that God gives us to do what He wants, and secondly, to pronounce, proclaim the fundamental faith of our Jewish people. Of course, that's where we're going to start. I mean, the Gemara doesn't ask also why do we start with the tractate of Berachot. That's I don't know if that's ever asked. So there's certain things that are taken for granted, and we're left for us to either answer or not even bother answering. They might just be arbitrary, but I don't think they are. I mean, the explanation I know of about why we start with Brachos as the first tractate in the entire Mishnaic corpus is because Brachos is all about faith. It's all about the fundamentals of our faith, as manifested through our verbalization of that faith, which is what a blessing is. So, of course, you're going to start with that. So that could be all the more so the case with why we start Brachot and the entire Mishnah with Kriyat Shema, because that's the fundamental of the fundamental. It's interesting because it's not even a bracha. It's not even a blessing. Kriyat Shema is a proclamation. It's simply a repetition of verses. Are we drawing down blessing by saying that? Probably. That's what any mitzvah does. But why does this start brachot? Is that really a big question to ask in the first place? I mean, I'm sure there's other. It's not like it's not like the names of different tractates in the Talmud aren't used relatively loosely sometimes. It's not like on Shabbos, Masechet Shabbos, we're always talking about Shabbat. So, but you would think that you would start with Shabbat, as you do, Yetziot Shabbat. And you would think that in Eruvin you would start with Eruv, which I think you do. Well, in Tanis you don't start with fasting. So it's interesting to see what tractates begin with specific adherence to the name of the tractate and what don't. And that might say a lot about the depth of the name of the tractate. So, what is a blessing? What is a bracha? And how can we start a tractate called brachot without discussing brachot? We're not discussing a bracha. We're discussing Kriyat Shema, a proclamation of our faith. So maybe it is a bracha, or maybe there's a depth to brachot, or prerequisites to brachot. I mean, there you go. That might be it. The prerequisite to a bracha is Shema. If you're going to draw blessing down into the world, if you are going to say a blessing with any form of intention, and for that blessing to have any significance, you first have to acknowledge and recognize the source of all blessing. Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. God is our God. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. If you don't recognize that the Lord is our God and the Lord is one, you can't invoke his name for blessing because you don't recognize him as the source of all blessing. You don't even know what a blessing is. So, of course, we start with Kriyat Shema. And Of course, we start not with why we say Kriyat Shema, but why are we starting with Kriyat Shema in the evening? Because of course we start with Kriyat Shema. So now we just want to ask why we start with the Kriyat Shema of the evening and not the morning. So the beginning of a tractate, there's a reason you're starting the tractate there. There's a reason that Shabbat starts with the Yetziot HaShabbat. There's something fundamental about entering and exiting a reshut, a domain, on Shabbat that has to do with all of Shabbat, and without which Shabbat doesn't have the same significance, weight, or understanding for us. And there's a reason why Ta'anit starts with asking for rain, because there must be a connection between the abundance God provides for us, and only God can provide for us, and us humbling ourselves by fasting. So here, there's a connection between Kriyat Shema, the fundamental proclamation of our faith, and and invoking the source of all blessing. So it actually makes a lot of sense. So that's why we start with Kriyat Shema, and that's probably also within the greater question of why we start with Berachot, because Berachot is really the whole reason we are alive at all is to bring blessing into this world. It's to bring Hashem into this world. It's to give him a dwelling in the lower realms. So of course we start with Berachot. And of course we start with the fundamental prerequisite for Berachot, Kriyat Shema. And now we want to understand why we start with Kriyat Shema in the evening. And first of all, why is Kriyat Shema time bound? So yes, the Torah says, and here we're going to continue. Tana heichakai dekatane matai. What is up with the Tana asking this question of from when we say Kriyat Shema in the first place? Vetu, and further, Maishna, what is the significance? The Tane be'arvit bereisha, litnei de shacharit bereisha. What is up with the Tana, with the Mishnaic author, talking about the evening Kriyat Shema before we talk about the morning Kriyat Shema? I still don't fully feel like I really understand why these questions are juxtaposed. It might be rhetorical, because it maybe the Gemara knows that there's one answer for both. But as far as the reader is concerned, I haven't gotten to the answer yet. Like, why are you juxtaposing both of these questions? There's a connection between these questions. There's something related intrinsically between these questions. What am I not taking for granted that I'm asking this question? Well, first of all, I'm not taking for granted the fact that Kriyat Shema is a time-bound mitzvah. That there's such a reason to ask the question of from when one must say Shema. And the second thing I'm not taking for granted is when, if it's a time-bound mitzvah, if there is a so I think it's not necessarily, so maybe the perspective of the person asking this question is we already know that we say Shema at night and we say Shema in the day. But why be so precise? It's not really not that. It's not a why question. It's more like, what are you standing on? Really, what are you standing on to ask the question of from when? What does that mean? Like, what are you standing on? I think I get it, but I can't, having a hard time articulating it. because it's not the same as asking why necessarily. It's not necessarily saying it's not necessarily what I've been saying until now, which is that how the heck does the Tana even know that it's a time bound mitzvah? It's not necessarily that question. Maybe the perspective is, yeah, everyone knows you say Shema at night and you say Shema in the morning. But what this question has as a presupposition is you have to be standing on something to ask a question like this. So, where are you standing to ask from when? In other words, every question seems to have a biblical root to it. In other words, what is the teaching God has already given us explicitly that is it provoking you? Where are you standing that you are being provoked to ask this question? In response to what? You don't just ask questions out of thin air in these cases, in this area, or in general. We ask in response to something. And in this case, the assumption is we're asking in response to a godly stimulus. So the godly stimulus we have is the written Torah. It's the itaruta dil ela. It's the awakening from above that is supposed to eventually lead to the awakening from below. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam, she'hakol nehiya bidvaro. What's the awakening from above that happened that is invoking this awakening from below? What or evoking or eliciting this awakening from below? What what are you responding to when you are asking the question, from when do we say Shema? You're not just you're not just responding to the tradition. You're not just trying to clarify a tradition. There is some directive from above that you are taking and nurturing, really. Because the idea is that God is our husband. So he provides the the flour and we turn it into bread. So what are we processing here as his wife? Chazal are called the mother of the Jewish people. So what are we processing here as God's wives? What are we processing here? We are processing the verse "Uveshach becha uvkumecha," or the creation account of the world. That is Tanahei Chakai. Like, what connection does this have to God's word? What are we processing here? Dekatane me matai. Vitu, mai shna detane be'arvit berisha. Litnei de shacharit berisha. So it's saying, okay, I'm assuming that the Mishnaic author is standing on some point of divine direction